Hey gang, it's Dr. Jeff. Thanks for joining the Dr. Jeff Show today. On this show, I interview major thought leaders from many different fields of influence, showing how our worldview changes everything. My guest today is bold and blunt. That is the name of the podcast that Cheryl Chumley records twice a week. She's also a columnist for the Washington Times and an investigative journalist whose latest book, Socialists Don't Sleep, has got to, and we've got to get the word out about this because Christians now need to stand up. If you've ever wondered how investigative journalists do what they do, you're going to love this show because Cheryl's going to tell us how to find the kind of information that we need to stand for truth. Let's go. Cheryl Chumley, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show.
It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
I am really looking forward to this conversation because I love what you do for a living. You are an investigative journalist. You are exposing government corruption. You're focusing on what's happening in the culture. Your new book, Socialism Never Sleeps, is really going to be exciting to talk about. And it seems like in our country right now, we are routinely, every day, Republicans and Democrats, putting up with stuff that our founders would never have put up with. And that's one of the things that I think is so cool about your book, and I can't wait to dig into it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And, it really is a sign of how far we've come in this country. When you look at just the last year of the coronavirus and all the clampdowns that we've gone through in the name of public health. And to me, at this point in time, the sanest people in America are those two fitness club owners in New Jersey who refuse to go by the government bureaucrats' orders to shut down their gym and actually tore the plywood off the windows that the bureaucrats had nailed up in order to keep their business going. That's what we need more of in this country, and not just from patriots, but also particularly from Christians in the political world, because this country is so rapidly losing our individual God-given freedoms. If we don't stand up for them now, they're going to be forever lost.
Yeah. That's how we hear that message, where we go to get good, solid information, and how we actually act, I hope is going to be the focus of the show. So thank you. I really appreciate your coming on. I want to get to get our audience to let our audience have the opportunity to get to know you a little bit before we dive into the topic of socialism, especially, and some of the other things that you've investigated. But you're a journalist. You're an investigative journalist. You're also a licensed private investigator. So you have this investigation skill set. I'm just curious, how did you find your calling in that before we get into some of the specific topics?
Well, it's just years and years and years ago. I knew I wanted to be a writer growing up, but investigative journalism was always kind of the type of journalism that got my heart pounding. And it just seemed a natural fit to combine my natural God-given talents of writing with my investigative nature. And at the same time, it's hard to choose. If you have a lot of interest in life, you don't want to just pick one career and be that for the rest of your life. And I always thought if I wasn't a journalist, I would be a private investigator or I would be a constitutional attorney. And so there just came a point in time where everything came together. The timing was right. And I was able to pursue becoming a private investigator as well. So, and as I have found out, I can hold both titles, do both jobs at the same time.
Now, I know there's overlap in this, but the one thing when I see a good investigative journalism piece, my mind always goes to, how did they ever discover that? How did they ever find that out? Because all the people who would know the truth aren't going to answer your phone calls or tell you anything. What are some of the techniques that you've learned that you apply when you start into a new topic that maybe we can use to become better truth seekers ourselves?
Honestly, I just think it's my worldview. My worldview is Christian, Bible-based first, and limited government constitution second. So when I flip on the daily news, I see everything through that lens. And things that don't line themselves up with that become fodder for my commentaries or for my investigations. And they're just red flags that go off in my head. So I've never had an issue trying to find something investigative or research to pursue, because it's all out there all around us. It's just that if you listen to most in the media, it's either being ignored or it's being vastly underreported.
Can you give us an example of one of those things, because you have several of them, and several of them have led to books that you have written. Can you give us an example of what that's looked like for you?
Well, let's just talk for a minute about the Great Reset, that phrase that you've heard bandied about for the last year. The Great Reset and Build Back Better. Okay, those are both phrases that maybe 50% of America just hears and they think, oh, that's nice. Yeah, let's build back better from this coronavirus. We're all in it together. Let's build back America and become great once again. Well, there's a deeper meaning behind these words. The Great Reset is actually, and if you go to the website, don't take my word for it. Go to the World Economic Forum's website and find out for yourself. But if you look at what the Great Reset actually means, it's the World Economic Forum's way of using the coronavirus to upset the economies of the world and cripple capitalism and redefine capitalism. So basically, it's communism. Go to the Great Reset on the World Economic Forum's website, and you'll find out what I did. That basically, they want to redefine capitalism so that instead of being in business for profits, instead of being in business for the shareholders, you're in business for the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are defined as anyone and everyone who surrounds a certain corporation. That means Black Lives Matter becomes a stakeholder in that business. So Black Lives Matter's agenda becomes a top priority for that business, not the shareholders not making money. And then if you pursue that rabbit trail a little bit further, you find out that here in America, there were 181 chief executive officers of corporations who signed on to the Business Roundtable, which is an organization that kind of sets the criteria for corporate platforms for the year. The Business Roundtable's new mission for corporations, which coincidentally is to appease stakeholders, not shareholders. Wow. So you put all that together, you find a little bit of supporting evidence here, a little bit more supporting evidence there, and what you find is that through the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, what businesses are trying to do in America is change capitalism so that instead of being profit-driven, it becomes the social justice warrior and the social justice moral compass of society. And look, you can see that playing out with all this woke corporatism or wokeism in the corporate world. This is where it's coming from. So what you do is you just start by asking questions. Is that something that just came up overnight, or is there an actual strategy and longer term plan behind it? And 9 times out of 10, these things don't come out of a bubble. There's actually somebody dictating at the top how to redefine or how to go forward with policies and politics.
Is this why Delta Airlines, for example, went after the Georgia election law?
Yes.
It was okay. So somebody can like the law or not like it, or like parts of it or not like parts of it. That's how a constitutional republic works. But the president of Delta Airlines, from my understanding, never read the bill and yet put out a statement, some kind of a statement condemning it. Is that an illustration of what
That's exactly it. And Delta, I believe, is one of the signatories of that Business Roundtable redefining of purpose of the corporate world. So if you have corporations that aren't concerned about making money as their top priority, which is pure, right? That it's a capitalistic, clean system. You produce a product, if people like it, they buy it. There's no deception there. But instead, these corporations want to become sort of the moral compass by having social justice campaigns. This is what America, capitalism is not about. That's kind of what the social justice leftists want. But this is where our country is headed.
Okay. So if I want to know if some new policy initiative comes out that offends leftists, and I want to know which corporations are likely to speak out against it, I go to the World Economic Forum Great Reset page and see the list of the companies that have signed on. And I can probably...
Go to the Business Roundtable, go to Google, type in Business Roundtable Statement of Purpose, and you will see the latest. And you know what? This was well covered in the press. So you will see all these press reports about how corporations in America have changed from becoming profit-driven to becoming more social justice cause-driven.
So the usual suspects here, this list of 180 and however many more it is right now, are the companies that we can expect will put out statements on all of these issues, essentially condemning anything that is free market oriented.
That's what that's what my instinct tells me. That the signs are there. The 181 corporations, the CEOs, have signed on to this redefining of what it means to be a corporation, which happens coincidentally to be the exact same desire of the Great Reset through the World Economic Forum, the redefining of capitalism. So if you put that together and then watch what's happening on daily news with these corporations coming forward with all their social justice campaigns, I mean, the obvious conclusion is they're all working together. They're working toward the same agenda to upset what it means to be capitalistic and a free market business in this country.
This explains so much because I was just the other day out for a run and for some reason was trying to think this through. And I thought there is no way that the president of Delta Airlines came up with this. And probably there's somebody behind that business roundtable who's saying, okay, guys, this is your chance to speak up on something. Here's the wording. Knowing that, is there any way to call their bluff?
Right. That's what it comes down to. So how do we fight this, right? When you start to see the larger picture, it makes things clearer in your mind, right? Because you see, oh, it's not just happening one person over here and one person over there, a big grassroots swell. It's a big concerted, coordinated strategy. So it clarifies it. But then the question is, well, how do you fight it? And I think we're seeing at this point in America a tipping point where people, even on the left, I just saw a poll the other day that even those in the Democrat Party are tired of corporations wagging their fingers at American citizens and telling them that they're inherently racist and they need to apologize to certain communities in the country, when all they really want to do is buy their Coke, buy their Pepsi, and be left alone. So there's a tipping point in this country, and you ask a great question about, what can people do? And it's just to stand strong for the American principles, and soon enough, these corporations will either have to abide or they will disappear to some overseas culture where they're more accepted for their anti-capitalistic practices.
It's probably worth noting when you look at the 500 largest companies in America now, as opposed to the 500 largest companies, say, 70 years ago. There's a huge difference. There's no such thing as a Studebaker. There's no such thing as Brown's shoes, right? The largest companies of the world today, CEOs were not even born when those other companies went out of business. But at one time, they were the top ones. So any company that thinks that their platform is inviolable and is impregnable because they've got a lot of cash has got another thing coming. Consumers decide.
Consumers do decide. The glitch or the wrench thrown in that consumer corporate relationship has been the coronavirus. And why the World Economic Forum sees the coronavirus as their great opportunity to bring about this great reset, this great redefining of capitalism, is that it has successfully shut down businesses around the world, but particularly in America, where it matters most, where we have a thriving free market. And what that's done is it's put government in control of giving out stimulus dollars here, giving out stimulus dollars there, making it to the point where people don't even want to go back to work because they make more money off the taxpayer dole than they do in the free market. And so what you're having now is this sort of killing of the middle class, right? The businesses, the big businesses have survived. The small businesses, the mom and pop shops, the entrepreneurial type creations are falling and faltering even more now. And so this is how government can really gain a foothold into the private market, into the capitalistic system by keeping people at home and really dependent on the taxpayer dollar.
Wow. I know there's a U.S. Senate Select Committee on, I think it's called Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And they were able to show that in the last 10 years, half of the small businesses that were started in America were started by people who are minorities. And that African Americans who run a small business have 12 times the wealth of African Americans who do not have small businesses. So by taking this approach, the government is actually hurting the people who could benefit the most from the free market.
Right. And it's driven by Democrats. Look, this is why Democrats, one of the reasons why Democrats so feared Donald Trump. Donald Trump did a remarkable thing for the Black community in particular. He gained a lot more votes in his second run at the presidency from Black males than he did even in 2016. And that is something that terrifies Democrats because they rely on the Black vote. I mean, that's their core voting block. And if they lose that block, then it really puts a dent in their ability to maintain control. And one of the reasons Donald Trump was able to boost his numbers and his favor among Black males in the Black community was because of his business approach. He didn't just look at Black people and think, well, we have to give them handouts, we have to give them taxpayer dollars. He looked at them and he actually helped them create their own wealth. So that's something Democrats hate. They don't want people to be self-sufficient, independent. They want more people basically living off the government so they have control over who gets and who doesn't get.
Cheryl, here's a question I've been mulling over, and I haven't had anybody to ask this, so because it fits into our conversation. I can hear somebody who's skeptical saying, okay, some of the things you're talking about I agree with, some of them make sense to me. But you guys are conspiracy nuts. You know, how is there a logical way to distinguish between good, solid investigative journalism that uncovers truth and conspiracy?
Yeah, look it up yourself. Look, everything I'm saying is right there. It's right in front of you on the website. All you have to do is do what I did. You know, just have a questioning attitude. Wow, why are all these businesses shaking their fingers at me now and starting these campaigns for Black Lives Matter? Where does that come from? So go to Business Roundtable and look at their redefining of capitalism. Go to the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and look at what they say. Listen to Klaus Schwab, who is the leader of the World Economic Forum, a German, and how he wants to take this new coronavirus atmosphere and completely build back better. And then look at how he defines build back better. It's his words, a new form of capitalism, a new economy. So the difference between investigative journalism and conspiracy theory is that investigative journalism is out there in the open. It's provable. And good investigative journalists will give you the sources so you can go check it out yourself. If it's a conspiracy theory, what they tell you to look at for information will crumble quickly, or it will leave more question marks in your head and not answers.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I know in our program at Summit Ministries, we're encouraging people to understand the times in which they live. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be willing to read and do some research. If you want to be a leader, you've got to be a reader. You've got to study hard. I want to dig into talking about your new book, Socialism Never Sleeps, with the time that we've got, because the first thing I noticed, and I mentioned this before the show, is that you've got tons of reviews on Amazon.com for this book, like 1,000 reviews. And a whole bunch of them are trolls. People who leave 1-star review and say, this is the worst book I have ever read. Don't bother. I just threw it in the trash or whatever. And not a single one of them is a verified purchaser, which means they're just making all of this up, right, to try to diminish the sales of the book. And then I saw another person who had written a 5-star review, said all the 1-star reviews made me suspicious. So I bought the book, read it, and loved it. So I just thought that was a lot of fun. You cannot pay attention to those people who are thoughtless critics. So
you're absolutely right. And just real quick to give you my response to that, here's why I think the trolls have come after my book so badly. Some other books written on socialism, they don't have the trolls. I know, because I've looked. I've had the same questions. Why are the trolls coming after me? What's up with this? And the thing is, I think it's because I make the link with Christianity. I'm not talking about just socialism in America. I'm talking about socialism, and Christians need to get involved in particular. So I think that's why the trolls are so up in arms. They can't stand the link being made there.
So they're thinking that Christians should be socialist?
Well, a lot of them, yeah. I mean, there is an actual movement, and I cover this in my book. I think it's just that they don't want the link being known. They don't want the link being talked about. One of the worst things you can do as a politician is to actually stand up there and make the case for Jesus in this country, because you're going to alienate so many people who don't want Jesus talked about in this country. And so I think when I make the link right in my title between socialism and the need for Christians to get involved, they understand, the trolls understand, that what I'm saying is, as a nation grows more and more secular, it goes farther and farther down the path of socialism, that these two things are linked, socialism and atheism, same as communism and atheism.
I remember seeing a study about that from George Barna from Arizona Christian University. I think it's called the Center for Cultural Research. And he did a study and said that basically if you control for Christianity, 97% of socialists are non-Christians, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the link is, why is China? Why are all these closed societies? Why are despotic nations largely secular, or the government wants them to be secular? It's because the government ultimately does not want God becoming the go-between. The government doesn't want God taking the people away. The government wants the worship of the people itself. It doesn't want people to worship God.
Now, let me give you a statistic that we found in some of our research, because I think this is where a lot of who are in the rising generation are. 7 in 10 millennials said they would vote for a socialist for president, for example. But we did a study of church-going, born-again Christian people. And among the young adults, 83% strongly believed or believed somewhat in the following statement: that the root of society's problem is that the rich exploit the poor. That was their belief, which is a core Marxist belief. And virtually all Christian church-attending Christians of a certain age believe that is the framework by which we should see the world.
Well, let me come back with this. Yes, that's a core Marxist belief, right? but it's also based on a biblical idea too, that the root of evil is love of money, right? So it's hard to know what each respondent was thinking or the motivation for each respondent's thought process to check that off. And if it is the biblical-based version that the root of all evil is the love of money, if it's something along those lines, then certainly they're not far off.
How would you, I guess those two statistics I had put together in my mind, knowing that these young adults are trending towards socialism and kind of assuming that meant something maybe more than it did about their response. But make the case for a few minutes about why standing against socialism is a Christian thing to do.
Oh, I don't need a few minutes for that. That's easy. I mean, well, there's a whole segment of the population out there, and like I said a minute ago, I cover this in my book, that believe that socialism is in line with Christianity, that the good Christian must be socialist, that in fact, Jesus, if he were here right now, he would be socialist. And I find that a wicked interpretation of biblical truths, a wicked skewing of biblical truths, because first and foremost, socialism basically puts the government in charge. Basically, the government is in charge of dictating who gets, who doesn't get, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and so forth. And Jesus always taught of the importance of the individual relationship. Jesus didn't go around telling the Pharisees that they needed to give their money to government for government to then decide who gets the dole outs. Jesus went around and preached, helping the poor, but as an individual, not as a government body. So to say that Jesus wants government to be socialist because he wants everyone to be fed equally and have housing and so forth, that's a Christian responsibility as an individual believer in Jesus and follower of Jesus. It's not a government's responsibility.
Right. So if I were to say, I am going to be generous to the poor by making Cheryl give $1,000. How
is that generous? You're stealing from me to make yourself feel better, and then you're patting yourself on the back as doing a good act of, charitable work for Jesus. That's evil to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So play that out a little bit. How we make the case for the free market as something that is part of a biblical understanding of the world. What should a Christian say around the water cooler at work when somebody says, "Oh yeah, I love Bernie Sanders. I love AOC. I think these people are doing a good thing." That's the kind of conversation that we know is taking place. How does a Christian make an intelligent entry into that conversation in a way that leaves people thinking and maybe seeing the truth?
Well, start off by saying, hey, well, give me what's in your wallet or pocketbook so I can distribute to those in more need than you. And, half seriously, that's exactly what the Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio types want to do. But here's why the free market is in line with biblical principles. Here's why the free market is Christian, in my view. God gives everybody at birth, he endows everybody with certain gifts and talents and missions. We all have the same amount of purpose in God's eyes. He bestows us with certain gifts that we're to carry forth in life for his glory. Okay, so when I want to be a writer, I have a God-given gift of writing. I write and it glorifies God because I recognize that my gift comes from him. Say somebody else wants to be a builder. Well, they build, and when they do that, because that's the talent that God gave them at birth, they are glorifying God. But when you take away the free market and you make it so the government dictates who gets to do what and who's allowed to have this amount of education and who has a talent for this and You can't do that because you weren't born in the right circumstances, and all the other regulations that go along with big government, nanny-state government, and socialist communist-style government, that just kills the free market. And in so doing, it kills the seeds of greatness that were all given at birth from God and for his glory.
Wow. Obviously, this is something that parents need to be teaching to their kids because they are getting the exact opposite message at school. Mm-hmm. Approach this as a parent for a minute. If you know your child, and it's not just in public schools. I know of Christian schools that teach the same thing. They teach what you just said about people believing that Jesus would be a socialist today. So wherever you're going off to school, your child is going to be facing this. Have that breakfast conversation with me for a minute. How do you help prepare that child to have some resilience against what they're going to hear?
Well, I have 4 kids, and I have different experiences with all 4 kids. All 4 kids started out going to public school. My oldest 3 went straight through public school. My 4th, my youngest, who is 14 right now, I yanked her out of public school during Barack Obama's days because he put in place that awful transgender policy that allowed, boys to go into girls' dressing rooms. And she used to come running home from school, racing to the bathroom because she was afraid to use the restroom at school, that a boy might be there. So she's in her Christian church-based school. But my other 3 went through the public school systems. And with my second oldest, my second son in particular, we used to laugh about what he would learn in science class for environmental regulations and the whole climate change alarmism. And we used to laugh at the dinner table about the anti-capitalistic, anti-founding fathers, Constitution is racist type theories that he'd learned in history class. So it's not, and with my 2 oldest, the same thing. We used to talk to them about politics and about the culture, and then we would talk in comparative terms about what they were learning in their public school system. So you can be a parent in this day and age and raise a fighter in your child to go out in this evil world, in this secular world, and actually take a stand and be an effective warrior for Christ. Armed with the truth. You don't necessarily have to put your child in private school or have to homeschool your child to do it. You can just have conversations with them about how you see things in the world and how it's different from what they're taught in school. And that's actually really effective because then they get the lies and then they get the truth and they're able to go out and argue effectively with the truth. Mm.
I know people want to be more informed about this, and I know our subscribers are going to want to get your book, Socialism Never Sleeps. What are some other sources of good information that we should be paying attention to every day that will help undergird our reason and knowledge?
Well, shamelessly, I write for the Washington Times, and I write commentaries every day. I have a 3 times a weekly newsletter they can sign up for. And in my newsletter, I cover all this stuff. So if you need to be armed with some talking points to argue against CNN and the Washington Post, check out my newsletter and stuff. And I also do a twice weekly podcast at the Washington Times where I interview people who actually speak biblical or Christian or conservative principles that also help you fight these deceptions that are going on in the culture. But aside from that, honestly, you have to do your own research now. We are way past the days of being able to just flip on the evening news and be educated. Mm. We have to flip on the evening news to be educated on what the enemy is saying, and then go online or turn on the radio or do both and educate ourselves and find out, other truths out there so we can form a reasoned, informed opinion. Hmm.
Yeah. We'll have all of those links that you just mentioned in the show notes for this. So anybody who's driving along right now, don't look for a pencil. Don't stop and text something. Just you'll have it all in the show notes when you get home. But give us the name of your podcast.
It's called Bold and Blunt, and it's on the Washington Times.
Okay.
I have everyone from Pastor Jack Hibbs out in California to Senator Josh Hawley. So it's a big mix of different people.
Yeah. Wow. That is cool. Love both of those guys.
Yeah.
Now, so we want to be better informed. We want to be able to talk to our children. We want to be able to talk more intelligently to our neighbors and to our friends. But what we're talking about here still affects the corporations we buy from. The federal government is omnipresent in our lives. How do we fight back against forces that are that big?
Well, I mean, that is the big question, right? And so first and foremost, Christians have an advantage here because we have faith, right? Or we're supposed to. In the end, we know the battle's already won. All we have to do is take our individual stand and refuse to bow down to the enemy forces. We just have to keep our light going the best way we know how. And so, every day I start with prayer. I arm myself for battle on most days. Sometimes I forget, but that's how you have to go about your day-to-day living. And if you're a Christian and you look around and you're worried, anxious, despondent about the state of things in America, that's fine because they are pretty sad, dark times that we're facing. The cultural rot alone is enough to bring us down. But take heart from stories in the Bible about like Gideon, who started out with so many, and then God kept whittling down his army. And he kept whittling it down for one reason, because he wanted the glory to go to himself. So in this country, really, the more whittled we become, the smaller the remnant seems. That actually, to me, is closer to the time when God is going to swoop in and make his presence known. So really, that'll be a good day to come. So take heart in that. Yeah,
that is so heartening. And I'm curious. We think a lot about the rising generation at Summit Ministries. That's our focus. We're equipping and supporting the rising generation to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. As we draw the show to a close, what would your word be to young adults who are in the thick of this? They are in the arena right now as high school students, college students, 20-somethings who are in the workforce.
Be that exceptional one. Be that one that stands out, the one that's unique, the one that isn't afraid to stand tall for God. I have a son that especially inspires me because he will go against the system of all his all the people that he knows maybe drinking or doing something in the secular world, and he's that one that says no to it. And when you're that, when you can do that, you're someone that God can use mightily. And I just would like to say to younger people, stand strong, stand up and be bold. Don't be afraid to question authority. I know that's probably counter to what you've been told your whole life and your whole youth, but seriously, the authorities, when they're ungodly, they need to be questioned. And so it's up to the youth to be able to do those questions in a forceful manner and demand answers.
Wow. Well, Cheryl Chumley, thank you so much for coming on the Dr. Jeff Show. We've got practical ideas. We've got some investigative skills that we've come away with, have some spiritual inspiration, and we've got some good sources to turn to. It's great to have you as a friend, and thank you for everything you do to stand for the truth. Thank you for joining us on the Dr. Jeff Show today, and thank you to Cheryl Chumley for coming on the program. The book Socialists Never Sleep reminds us why it's so crucial to be constantly aware of how our worldview shapes society. So as leaders, we can help build a world in which Jesus shines through us into the lives of those around us in the way that we speak truth. So please visit CherylChumley.com, on Twitter at CK Chumley, and then you can get the book Socialists Never Sleep wherever books are sold. We'll see you next week, and remember, worldview changes everything. Invite your friends to join the next show.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Dobson from the Rebel Parenting Podcast. When my parents, Jim and Shirley Dobson, sent me to the Summit Ministries Worldview Conference when I was 17, We had no idea the impact it would have on my life. It changed me so much in 2 short weeks, I've returned every summer for 34 years. This summer, your student can attend an in-person conference. That's right, in person. Summit Ministries Worldview Conference challenges students ages 16 to 24 to think deeper about their convictions and their faith by engaging with today's top worldview thinkers and apologists. Can you imagine in person with other students learning about the Christian worldview? If not, they can attend Summit's virtual experience, and it's amazing. Change your student's life forever by partnering with Summit Ministries Worldview Conference today. Find out more by clicking the link in the show notes.